Number 1. The Vanishing Ship. In 1943, the United States Navy embarked on one of the most classified and controversial experiments in military history. Project Rainbow, later known as the Philadelphia Experiment, was designed to render naval vessels invisible to enemy radar using revolutionary electromagnetic field manipulation technology. The USS Eldridge, a destroyer escort, was selected as the test vessel for this groundbreaking invisibility research. Navy scientists had theorized that by generating powerful electromagnetic fields around a ship's hull, they could bend light and radar waves, creating an effective cloaking system that would give Allied forces a decisive advantage in World War II. The experiment took place at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard on October 28, 1943. Massive electromagnetic generators were installed throughout the ship, creating a complex network of field projectors designed to envelope the entire vessel in an invisibility field. The technology was based on Einstein's unified field theory, which suggested that electromagnetic and gravitational forces could be manipulated to alter the behavior of light and matter. When the generators were activated, witnesses reported seeing a greenish fog begin to form around the USS Eldridge. The ship's outline became increasingly hazy as the electromagnetic field intensified, and within minutes, the entire destroyer had completely vanished from sight. But what happened next defied every scientific principle known to human understanding. Instead of simply becoming invisible, the USS Eldridge had apparently been transported through space itself. The ship materialized at the Norfolk Naval Station in Virginia, over 200 miles away from Philadelphia, where it remained visible to startled personnel for several minutes before vanishing again and reappearing back at its original location. The crew members who survived the experiment described horrifying effects that suggested the ship had briefly existed outside normal space and time. Some sailors were found partially embedded in the ship's metal hull, as if their bodies had been fused with the steel during the dimensional transition. Others reported experiencing severe disorientation and claimed they could see through their own hands, as if they remained partially invisible even after the experiment ended. Most disturbing were the accounts of crew members who insisted they had witnessed impossible geometries and alien landscapes during the brief moments when the ship existed between dimensions. They described seeing corridors that stretched infinitely in all directions, gravity that flowed like water, and strange luminescent beings that seemed to exist as pure geometric patterns. Navy officials immediately classified all records of the Philadelphia experiment and transferred surviving crew members to different assignments with strict orders never to discuss what they had experienced. The electromagnetic equipment was dismantled, and all research into dimensional manipulation was officially terminated. But declassified documents that emerged decades later contained references to space-time displacement anomalies and trans-dimensional navigation effects that suggested the Navy had accidentally discovered something far more significant than simple invisibility technology. The experiment had apparently torn a hole in the fabric of reality itself, allowing the USS Eldridge to briefly travel through what could only be described as another dimension. Independent researchers who investigated the Philadelphia experiment found evidence that similar tests had been conducted on other vessels with equally disturbing results. Ships that had undergone electromagnetic field exposure reportedly experienced ongoing dimensional instabilities, with crew members occasionally phasing in and out of visible reality for years after the experiments ended. Number 2. The dimensional echo. Deep within a classified Soviet research facility in the 1960s, physicists were conducting experiments that would challenge the very foundations of optical science and accidentally open a window into parallel realities. The project began as an attempt to create perfect optical illusions using advanced mirror technology, but it evolved into something far more extraordinary and dangerous. The Soviet mirror chamber was a massive geodesic structure, nearly 30 feet in diameter, with its interior surfaces completely lined with precisely angled mirrors. These weren't ordinary mirrors, but specially crafted optical surfaces designed to create infinite reflections that could theoretically bend light in impossible ways. The chamber represented the pinnacle of Soviet optical engineering, incorporating mathematical principles that pushed the boundaries of geometric possibility. When researchers entered the chamber and activated the rotating electromagnetic field generators positioned around its perimeter, the mirror array created a visual environment unlike anything previously experienced by human beings. The infinite reflections generated by the geodesic mirror arrangement produced optical effects that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics, but something went wrong during the third week of testing. Researchers began reporting that their reflections in the mirrors were behaving independently, moving in ways that didn't correspond to their actual movements. These reflection figures appeared to possess their own consciousness, turning to look directly at the observers even when the researchers themselves were facing different directions. Dr. Yuri Kozlov, the lead physicist on the project, documented increasingly disturbing phenomena in his classified research notes. The reflection figures began displaying knowledge and information that the real researchers didn't possess, writing equations on fogged mirror surfaces and pointing toward areas of the chamber that contained hidden technical equipment. Most unsettling was the discovery that the reflection figures seemed to be observing the researchers from what appeared to be a completely different environment. While the real chamber contained standard laboratory equipment, the reflections showed the figures standing in landscapes filled with impossible architecture, floating geometric structures, and skies that shifted between multiple colors simultaneously. The experiment reached its terrifying climax when senior technician Mikhail Petrov entered the chamber for routine mirror calibration and simply vanished. Security cameras showed him walking toward the center of the chamber, but as he reached the focal point where all mirror reflections converged, his image fragmented across hundreds of mirror surfaces before disappearing entirely. Search teams found no trace of Petrov within the chamber, but his reflection continued to appear in the mirrors for several days afterward. The reflection Petrov appeared to be trying to communicate, gesturing frantically and pointing towards specific mirror surfaces, but no sound could be heard, and no method of communication could be established. Soviet officials immediately sealed the mirror chamber and classified all research materials under the highest levels of state secrecy. The facility was abandoned, and all personnel involved in the project were reassigned to different research programs with strict instructions never to discuss their experiences. Decades later, when portions of Soviet scientific archives were declassified, researchers discovered references to dimensional echo phenomena and trans-optical contact protocols that suggested the mirror chamber had somehow enabled communication with parallel versions of reality, where identical research was being conducted by alternate versions of the same scientists. Number 3, the toroidal tear. In the underground laboratories of Sandia National Laboratories during the late 1970s, researchers working on advanced plasma containment systems stumbled upon one of the most extraordinary dimensional anomalies ever documented. What began as routine testing of high-energy toroidal plasma formations quickly evolved into an encounter with what could only be described as a doorway between worlds. The Sandia Vortex project was designed to study the behavior of superheated plasma when contained within powerful magnetic field configurations. Scientists were attempting to create stable plasma rings that could potentially revolutionize energy generation and propulsion technologies. The experimental apparatus consisted of massive electromagnetic coils arranged in a perfect torus, capable of generating magnetic fields strong enough to contain plasma temperatures exceeding millions of degrees. During the 7th week of testing, Researchers activated the containment system at maximum power levels to observe plasma stability under extreme conditions. The electromagnetic coils generated their intended toroidal field, successfully containing the superheated plasma in a perfect ring formation. But as the plasma reached critical density, something unprecedented occurred that defied every known principle of physics. Instead of maintaining its expected ring structure, the plasma began to collapse inward while simultaneously expanding outward, creating what observers described as a swirling vortex of absolute darkness surrounded by brilliant energy patterns. The phenomenon appeared to consume light itself, creating a void so complete that it seemed to exist outside the normal spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. Dr. Margaret Chen, the project's lead physicist, immediately ordered all monitoring equipment to focus on the anomalous formation. Instruments detected gravitational fluctuations that shouldn't have been possible with the relatively small mass of the plasma ring. More disturbing were readings indicating that space itself was being twisted and compressed around the dark vortex. The most remarkable aspect of the phenomenon was its apparent transparency to certain types of radiation. While visible light was completely absorbed by the dark ring, specific frequencies of electromagnetic energy passed through unimpeded, as if the vortex existed in a different dimensional framework that selectively interacted with our reality. Against all safety protocols, Dr. Chen authorized the deployment of a remote sensing probe into the vortex. The probe was equipped with multiple cameras, electromagnetic sensors, and communication equipment designed to maintain contact even under extreme conditions. As the device approached the edge of the swirling darkness, it began transmitting data that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of space and time. The probe's cameras recorded a brief glimpse of an impossible landscape before all communication was lost. The transmitted images showed what appeared to be a vast desert environment under a sky that shifted between purple and deep amber colors. Most unsettling were the geometric structures visible in the distance, crystalline formations that seemed to pulse with their own internal light and defied conventional understanding of architectural possibility. Temperature readings from the probe indicated that the environment beyond the vortex maintained atmospheric conditions similar to Earth, but with gravitational effects that suggested the presence of multiple massive objects in close proximity. The final transmission contained electromagnetic signatures that seemed to indicate the presence of advanced technology operating on principles unknown to human science. Within minutes of the probe's disappearance, the plasma vortex began to destabilize. The dark ring contracted rapidly while emitting bursts of energy that overloaded monitoring equipment throughout the facility. Emergency shutdown procedures were initiated, but the electromagnetic fields had become self-sustaining, continuing to generate the vortex effect even after primary power was cut. The phenomenon finally collapsed when backup generators were overloaded and the entire facility lost power. When emergency lighting was restored, the experimental chamber showed signs of severe structural damage, with metal surfaces displaying unusual crystalline formations and electromagnetic signatures that persisted for weeks after the incident. Sandia officials immediately classified all documentation related to the Vortex project under the highest levels of national security restrictions. The experimental chamber was sealed, and all personnel involved in the research were reassigned to different projects with mandatory psychological evaluations and strict non-disclosure agreements. Number 4. The Time Rift. On the eastern tip of Long Island, beneath the abandoned Montauk Air Force Station, rumors persist of one of the most disturbing dimensional experiments ever conducted on American soil. The Montauk frequency trials, allegedly carried out between 1971 and 1983, represented an attempt to weaponize human consciousness using extreme electromagnetic frequency manipulation that accidentally tore holes in the fabric of time itself. The project emerged from classified research into the effects of specific radio frequencies on human brain function. Military researchers had discovered that certain electromagnetic wavelengths could influence thought patterns, memory formation, and even induce altered states of consciousness in test subjects. What began as psychological warfare research evolved into something far more ambitious and dangerous. The Montauk facility housed a massive radio transmitter array capable of generating electromagnetic pulses with unprecedented power and precision. The equipment included experimental phase-locked loop systems that could synchronize multiple transmitters to create standing wave patterns of enormous complexity. These electromagnetic fields were powerful enough to influence brain activity across vast geographical areas. According to whistleblower testimonies that emerged decades later, the experiments progressed through increasingly extreme phases. Initial tests focused on simple thought influence and memory suppression in volunteer subjects. But as researchers achieved greater control over electromagnetic field manipulation, they began attempting to use human consciousness itself as a form of interdimensional navigation system. The breakthrough allegedly came when researchers discovered that subjects in deep altered states could describe locations and events that existed outside normal space and time. These psychic reconnaissance missions initially focused on remote viewing of enemy installations, but subjects began reporting contact with landscapes and beings that couldn't exist within conventional reality. Duncan Cameron, who claimed to be a primary test subject, described experiencing what he called time storms during the most intense experiments. These episodes involved consciousness being projected through temporal rifts, where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. Cameron reported encountering alternate versions of historical events and witnessing possible future timelines that branched and converged in impossible ways. The experiment that allegedly created the first stable dimensional rift occurred in August 1983. Researchers had achieved unprecedented electromagnetic field coherence using their advanced transmitter array, creating standing wave patterns that seemed to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of space-time itself. When the field reached critical intensity, witnesses reported seeing a tear in the air above the transmission equipment. The rift appeared as a shimmering distortion that gradually expanded to reveal glimpses of an alien landscape. Through this dimensional window, observers could see rolling hills covered with unusual vegetation under a sky filled with multiple moons. Most disturbing were the silhouettes of tall, thin figures that seemed to be observing the facility from the other side of the portal. As the rift stabilized, instruments detected gravitational anomalies and temporal fluctuations that suggested the opening was connecting two different points in space-time. Some witnesses claimed they could see different seasons and times of day through various sections of the portal, as if it provided access to multiple temporal coordinates simultaneously. The experiment was abruptly terminated when one of the observed figures began approaching the dimensional opening from the other side. Panic spread through the facility as researchers realized they had no protocol for preventing interdimensional contact or controlling what might emerge from the rift. Emergency shutdown procedures were initiated, but the electromagnetic fields had achieved self-sustaining resonance. According to testimonies, the portal remained open for several hours before gradually collapsing as the transmitter array overheated and began to malfunction. During this time, sensitive individuals throughout the surrounding area reported experiencing vivid hallucinations, temporal displacement sensations, and contact with entities claiming to be from alternate versions of Earth. The Montauk facility was officially decommissioned shortly after the incident, with all equipment removed and the underground installations sealed. Personnel involved in the experiments were scattered to different assignments, and most signed comprehensive non-disclosure agreements backed by national security classifications that remain in effect today. Number 5. The quantum window. In the depths of CERN's Large Hadron Collider facility, beneath the Swiss-French border, particle physicists were conducting routine proton collision experiments when they inadvertently created what could only be described as a window into another realm. The arc flash event of 2012 began as a standard high-energy physics test, but evolved into one of the most closely guarded dimensional anomalies in scientific history. The European Organization for Nuclear Research had been systematically increasing collision energies in their pursuit of discovering new fundamental particles. On the morning of March 15th, the massive superconducting magnets were energized to unprecedented levels, accelerating proton beams to velocities approaching the speed of light, before directing them into head-on collisions that recreated conditions present moments after the Big Bang. Dr. Elena Vasquez, monitoring the collision data from the main control room, noticed readings that defied conventional particle physics. Instead of the expected spray of subatomic debris, the detectors recorded a sustained energy signature that seemed to exist in a stable configuration. Most puzzling was the energy pattern's apparent interaction with the facility's electromagnetic fields in ways that suggested it was drawing power from an unknown source. The phenomenon manifested as a shimmering distortion approximately 8 feet in diameter that appeared to hover 3 feet above the concrete floor of the detector chamber. Unlike normal electromagnetic effects, this distortion seemed to bend light around its edges while remaining perfectly transparent at its center, creating an optical effect that reminded witnesses of looking through extremely clear water. Security cameras positioned throughout the chamber began experiencing systematic malfunctions as the distortion stabilized. Electronic equipment near the phenomenon registered electromagnetic interference patterns that followed no known physics principles. Most significantly, temperature sensors detected localized cooling effects around the distortion, as if it was absorbing thermal energy from the surrounding environment. Against established safety protocols, Dr. Vasquez authorized the deployment of a remote sensing probe equipped with multiple cameras and electromagnetic measurement devices. As the probe approached the shimmering distortion, its transmitted images revealed something that challenged every assumption about the nature of space and particle physics. Through the transparent center of the distortion, the probe's cameras recorded a vast landscape that couldn't possibly exist within the underground facility. The images showed what appeared to be massive geometric structures, crystalline formations that stretched impossibly high into a sky filled with swirling patterns of light. Most disturbing were the readings indicating that gravity operated differently in the observed environment, with objects floating and moving in ways that violated fundamental physics. The probe's final transmission captured detailed images of architectural structures that seemed to be constructed from some form of living crystal. These formations pulsed with internal light and appeared to respond to the probe's presence, brightening and shifting color as the remote sensor moved closer to the dimensional window. Communication with the probe was abruptly lost when the device apparently passed through the distortion center. Monitoring equipment registered a brief spike in exotic particle production before all readings returned to normal levels. The shimmering window collapsed within seconds, leaving no trace of its existence except for the electromagnetic signatures recorded by facility instruments. CERN officials immediately implemented emergency lockdown procedures for the affected detector chamber. All personnel involved in the experiment were isolated for debriefing, and external communication about the incident was strictly prohibited. The facility's official report attributed the event to a power surge that caused temporary instrument malfunctions and optical illusions. But internal documentation that emerged through anonymous sources contained references to trans-dimensional aperture formation and exotic matter interaction protocols. that suggested CERN researchers had accidentally created a stable wormhole connecting their facility to a parallel universe with fundamentally different physical laws. The detector chamber where the incident occurred was permanently sealed and removed from active research use. New safety protocols were implemented, requiring immediate experiment termination if similar energy signatures were detected during future particle collision tests. Number 6. The Lightning Gate. In the remote wilderness of Colorado Springs during the winter of 1899, Nikola Tesla was conducting electrical experiments that would push the boundaries of electromagnetic science far beyond anything previously attempted. His massive experimental station, with its towering transmission coil and laboratory filled with revolutionary equipment, became the site of an accidental dimensional breakthrough that Tesla himself described as opening a path no human has traveled. Tesla's Colorado Springs facility represented the pinnacle of electrical engineering at the turn of the century. The centerpiece was a massive Tesla coil capable of generating electrical discharges with voltages exceeding 1 million volts, creating artificial lightning that could be seen for miles across the prairie landscape. But Tesla's true goal wasn't simply to create impressive electrical displays. He was attempting to harness the Earth's natural electrical field to transmit power wirelessly across vast distances. The breakthrough experiment occurred on December 12th, during one of Colorado's notorious winter storms. Tesla had discovered that by synchronizing his electrical transmissions with the natural lightning activity in the atmosphere, he could amplify his coil's output to levels that seemed to defy the laws of energy conservation. His laboratory instruments recorded electrical potentials that exceeded anything his equipment should have been capable of generating. As Tesla increased the power output to maximum levels, witnesses reported that the air around the massive coil began to shimmer with an otherworldly luminescence. The artificial lightning emanating from the transmission tower created patterns that didn't behave like normal electrical discharges, forming geometric configurations that seemed to fold in on themselves while generating sounds that resembled musical tones more than electrical crackling. Tesla's assistant, Coleman Cito, documented increasingly strange phenomena in the laboratory notebooks. The electrical discharges began creating what he described as tears in the atmosphere itself, dark gaps that appeared between the lightning branches and seemed to absorb both light and sound. These anomalies expanded and contracted rhythmically, as if breathing with a life of their own. The critical moment arrived when Tesla activated his wireless transmission system at full power while a massive natural lightning strike hit the facility's lightning rod. The convergence of artificial and natural electrical energy created a feedback loop that caused the laboratory's electromagnetic fields to achieve impossible coherence levels. The air above the transmission coil split open like a curtain, revealing a corridor of absolute darkness that seemed to stretch infinitely into nothingness. Tesla himself described the experience in encrypted notes that weren't discovered until decades after his death. He wrote of seeing dimensions beyond the veil of ordinary perception and encountering intelligence that exists as pure electromagnetic pattern. Most disturbing was his claim that something from the dark corridor had briefly entered his laboratory, observing his work before retreating back through the dimensional gap. The phenomenon lasted only minutes before the massive electrical feedback caused Tesla's equipment to overload catastrophically. The transmission coil exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal, while electromagnetic surges throughout the facility destroyed most of his recording instruments and experimental apparatus. The dark corridor vanished instantly, leaving only scorched metal and the acrid smell of ozone. Tesla spent the following weeks attempting to rebuild his equipment and replicate the dimensional opening, but he never achieved the same electrical coherence levels again. His notes from this period reveal growing paranoia about the entities he claimed to have encountered through the lightning gate. and his increasing reluctance to continue experiments that might reopen the dimensional pathway. The Colorado Springs laboratory was abandoned in 1900, with Tesla destroying most of his remaining equipment before departing. He never publicly discussed the dimensional breakthrough, referring to it only obliquely in later interviews as his greatest discovery and greatest mistake. The site remained sealed for decades, with local residents reporting strange electrical phenomena and unexplained light displays that persisted long after Tesla's departure. Number 7. The dark field. Within the classified research facilities of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, engineers were developing revolutionary sensor technology capable of detecting stealth aircraft and cloaked military assets when they inadvertently created one of the most terrifying dimensional anomalies in modern military history. The Shadow Sensor Project was designed to identify objects that absorbed or deflected electromagnetic radiation, but it instead opened a gateway to a realm of living darkness. The experimental sensor array consisted of hundreds of hypersensitive photodetectors arranged in a geodesic configuration, each capable of measuring light intensity variations down to individual photons. The system was designed to create a three-dimensional map of shadow patterns that could reveal the presence of invisible objects by analyzing how they blocked ambient light sources. During initial testing phases, the shadow sensors performed exactly as designed, successfully detecting stealth aircraft prototypes and experimental cloaking devices. But as engineers increased the system's sensitivity to achieve greater detection accuracy, the sensors began registering shadow patterns that corresponded to no visible objects within the testing chamber. Dr. James Morrison, the project's lead engineer, initially dismissed these phantom readings as instrument calibration errors. But as the sensor array's sensitivity increased, the mysterious shadows became larger and more complex, moving through the testing chamber in patterns that suggested deliberate intelligence rather than random instrument malfunction. The breakthrough occurred when engineers activated the shadow sensor array at maximum sensitivity while testing it against DARPA's most advanced stealth technology. Instead of detecting the cloaked test vehicle, the sensors registered massive shadow formations that seemed to exist independently of any physical objects. These shadows moved with purpose and coordination, as if they were living entities composed entirely of absorbed light. Most disturbing was the discovery that the phantom shadows were interacting with each other in ways that suggested communication or coordination. Sensor readings showed complex patterns of shadow convergence and separation that followed mathematical relationships too precise to be coincidental. The shadows appeared to be observing the testing chamber and responding to changes in the experimental conditions. The experiment reached its terrifying climax when engineers attempted to increase sensor sensitivity beyond design specifications. The photodetector array achieved unprecedented light measurement precision, creating a sensing field so sensitive it could theoretically detect individual photons from distant stars. But this extreme sensitivity had an unexpected consequence that violated every principle of electromagnetic physics. The testing chamber filled with absolute darkness that seemed to exist independently of any light source manipulation. Unlike normal darkness created by the absence of light, this phenomenon appeared to be composed of a substance that actively consumed electromagnetic radiation. Emergency lighting systems failed to penetrate the dark field, and personnel reported feeling a sense of overwhelming dread when approaching its boundaries. Within the dark field, instruments detected gravitational anomalies that suggested the presence of massive objects that couldn't be observed through any conventional means. Most alarming were the electromagnetic signatures that indicated complex technological activity operating on principles unknown to human science. The darkness itself seemed to be alive, pulsing and shifting in response to the sensor array's measurements. The phenomenon destabilized when the dark field began expanding beyond the testing chamber's boundaries. Emergency protocols were activated as the living darkness threatened to engulf the entire DARPA facility. The shadow sensor array was overloaded and destroyed in a desperate attempt to collapse the dimensional anomaly before it could escape containment. All personnel involved in the shadow sensor project were immediately reassigned and required to sign comprehensive lifetime non-disclosure agreements backed by national security classifications. The testing facility was sealed and removed from active use, with official reports attributing the incident to a catastrophic equipment malfunction that posed no ongoing security concerns.